was kind of sat toward the back. I was having a little bit of a sore throat, and I thought, well, just in case I'm contagious, don't want to be around people. So Monday morning, straight to the urgent care clinic, and I thought, if it's anything serious, they'll let me know. And I had strep throat. So they said, after 24 hours on antibiotic, I'm not contagious, so I'm well past that point, feeling a lot better, but I lost a little bit of time, and I did not get slides done for tonight. So that's why there are no slides. That's my long excuse for not getting my work done, so there you go. In Song of Solomon 7, beginning in verse 1, at a time when, depending on how you read the book, but I will just give you my synopsis. I believe this is a love story between Solomon and a woman, and it's really mostly from her perspective, although sometimes he speaks up. But beginning in chapter 7 and verse 1, they've gone through their wedding. They've had their first fight. The relationship itself is, like any relationship, there's some tension and some reunification and some tension and that happens with everyone. But he says, "How beautiful are your feet in sandals, O noble daughter! Your rounded thighs like jewels, the work of a master's hand. Your navel is a rounded bowl that never lacks mixed wine. Your belly is a heap of wheat encircled with lilies. Your two breasts are like two fawns, twins of a gazelle. Your neck is like an ivory tower. Your eyes are pools in Heshbon by the gate of Bath-rabbim. Your nose is like a tower of Lebanon, which looks toward Damascus. Your head crowns you like Carmel. Your flowing locks are like purple. A king is held captive in its tresses. How beautiful and pleasant you are, O loved one, with all your delights. Your stature is like a palm tree. Your breasts are like its clusters, and I say I will climb the palm tree and lay hold of its fruit. Oh, may your breasts be like clusters of the vine, and the scent of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine." We read that, and I think we're just a little bit uncomfortable. We don't like to read those things. So, that's a little racy for church, right? And yet, television and books and magazines and everything that you and your children are looking at, they have no problem discussing those things or portraying those things. None whatsoever, not one qualm. And this has, I think, affected our views towards sexuality. We're in this class now about set apart. And we're talking about being set apart from being like the world and everything else so that we can save a world. We have to be different. We've got to think different. We've got to challenge ourselves to be different. And that thinking, all of that requires us to be set apart and not view these things that are powerful, emotional things. And this, we've talked a little bit about our pocketbook. We've got to be set apart in how we use our money. We've got to be set apart in how we view pleasure. Even is it the most important pursuit that we make, or is it just something that is added on to our life as we're pursuing a relationship with God? That mentality. How do we view pleasure? How do we view sexuality? And I realize that we're not prude people. I know that, but and that we are somewhat private, and we don't talk about these things oftentimes. But by not speaking about this subject matter, we have almost relegated it to say, "Okay, world, you take over and teach us what you think." And when we do that, we have failed not only ourselves but generations after us. And so, what I would say, one of the greatest gifts that God has given humanity is sexuality. It obviously prolongs the human race, but it's about more than that. It's about an intimacy and a connection with someone else, right? We'll see that a little bit later in this lesson, but intimacy and connection. It's about pleasure. You read that section there in Song of Solomon 7, and obviously this guy's enjoying himself with his wife. It's about pleasure. And it's also about the completion of humanness. when God said it's not good for man to be alone, and he created the woman or a helper that was fit for him, right? Because man as by himself was incomplete. And the woman, the way he created her incomplete so that together they would be complete. The word that is there in Genesis 2:18, creating or making a helper fit for him, or some translations meet for him, or the idea of corresponding. Think about the word correspond. What's the root word of correspond? Response, respond. And it has the idea of co, right? The prefix of co. So we're going to co-respond. In other words, the man would respond to the woman, and the woman would respond to the man, both incomplete individually, but complete when they come together. And you say, well, but Sam, what about all those that remain unmarried? Are they incomplete? As far as God is concerned, yes, because he created the man or the woman to complete the other. Now, does that mean they can't be saved, or that they're less than or anything? Well, you know people that maybe have lost an arm. They're incomplete physically, right? Can they still be valuable? Can they still go to heaven? Are they still loved by God? Absolutely. Incompletion, God simply said it's not good that man's alone, and so he makes the completion. Well, part of that completion is the sexual relationship between a husband and a wife. And so that's one of the greatest gifts that God has given humanity, is because it brings these two together and holds them together, and it prolongs the human race that way. But the devil's corruption of sensuality and sexuality is what prevails our modern day. Not just the fact that some people commit adultery or that some people commit fornication. I mean, those are bad. I'm not minimizing those in any way. That's always existed. To me, the greatest corruption is in how modern society so casually views sexuality. That it has cheapened it to something that is not noble, that is not holy, that is not good. Now, a lot of these particular lessons, what we've been going through, we've been going through some statistics to show kind of what is the modern mindset. This one, the statistics are a little bit older than what I would normally like, but to me, they become even more powerful. If I could get someone to get me a cup of water or a bottle of water. Wait, is there still? No. There was one on that pulpit, that cup of, but just, here's one right here. Thank you so much. I didn't know I was going to do this. I probably shouldn't be drinking cough medicine. I get the alcohol kind now. So this is, there was he calls himself a cultural apologist, but he was called to testify before a Senate subcommittee in 1997. His name's David Murray. And there's transcripts of it, and you can go read them. Every paragraph I read was in his opening statement was like, wow, this is more powerful than the last one. It's even better than the last one. And what was up for debate was, should we start censoring television? That was the great question. And so he's dealing with statistics about television and life in 1997. So 29 years ago, almost 30 years ago. Before the internet, before the internet was prevalent. before smart devices, before we had computers in our pockets every day with access to anything in the world. And he said that TV proselytizes sexuality. Now, what do we mean by proselytize? I didn't think it was going to be this hard. I thought I had this covered. What do we normally mean when we say proselytize?
Converting someone to Christianity and faith.
Right, we usually use it in taking someone who is not connected with God, and we want to change them to one who is now connected with God, and so we're teaching them how to transform, right? He's saying that television is proselytizing, it's teaching us how to be sexual. That was his main idea. People, especially young people, were learning sexual identity from television, not from their homes, not from the church, and not from the Bible. Television. Now, who makes television shows? The producers. At that time, he said that roughly 7% of television executives identify as Christians. Now, at that time, around 60% of the public at large identified as Christians. 60% of the general population identified as Christian. 7% of those who were making television programming identified as Christians. What does that tell you? Yeah. Television, he says it comes down to two basic things. We normally hear one. What's television about? Why do we produce television? No, even before that. Sell stuff to make money. It's about money. It's always been about money. The second thing he says is about advocating for certain things. Advocating. Thirdly would be entertainment, but because, look, are there shows today that maybe you're entertained by part of the time, and then part of the time they get a little preachy because they advocate a certain thing, maybe something you agree with or something you disagree with, and they stop being entertaining. I see stuff that I agree with, and it stops being entertaining to me because that's more important. Money and advocacy are the two main things of television that he was saying in 1997. He says that the casual hookup culture that was portrayed on television in the 90s, early 2000s, was actually far removed from reality, where casual hookups with strangers were extremely rare. In real life, the vast majority of married men and women were faithfully monogamous at the time. Roughly all of their lives, women, all their married lives, 90% were faithful, and men, 75%. Granted, men don't have as good a record as women, but still, 75% of men throughout the whole of their married life were faithful. That's the vast majority. I feel for the 25%, but still, 75%. Some of the other things that he observed in this particular testimony, he said less than 25% of long-term relationships start with intercourse between strangers. Now think about television shows. At the time that this was, this particular testimony was given, 1997, the top-rated television show at that time, they asked people when they came in, what's your favorite TV show? And what was amazing was this was a survey done by Christianity Today. These are people who are coming to Christianity Today to read the articles. This is back when you got a hard copy of a magazine and you were flipping through it and you're reading the articles and stuff. There's a survey on there. They're asking their readers. Obviously a skewed perspective, right? A skewed perspective. These are mostly Christians. Atheists are probably not buying a subscription to Christianity today. These are a Christian representative. What is your favorite television show? 1997, guess what it was? Huh? Friends. Friends. Okay, a show that is dedicated to the lives of 6 single people and their sexual conduct. Now that's the most popular show among Christians in 1997. Christian respondents, at least. That says something about how the church is engaging in, understanding sexualization, right? And yet, less than 25% of long-term relationships in that day and age started with a hookup like that. They usually started as boy meets girl. They talk, they visit, they get to know one another, they get to know one another's friends. And most of them either, I'm not saying this is right, would either wait about a year before they would have a sexual encounter or until they were married. That's how the real world was in 1997 at the time when television was portraying something else. 89% had either of respondents, this was just a regular survey. They're asking people about their sexuality and things like that. I believe this survey was actually done in 1995, so it was a couple of years before the testimony was given before the Senate. 89% said that they had either 1 or 0 sexual partners over the last year. Most of them were married, meaning they were faithful to their spouse. If you extend it out over the past 5 years, that number went from 89% down to 72%. Very, very high. Of 1 or 0 partners over the last 5 years. Oftentimes on Friends, they didn't go a week without a different partner. You see the disconnect between what was being portrayed and what actually was at the time. Only 5.6% of couples lived unmarried at the time. In 1997, the end of the 90s, there was only about 5.6% of the people that were living together unmarried. And yet, television portrayed something much different. I'm going to read this quote from David Murray in the transcripts. He says, "It is the culture of hypersex. This culture is nearly the polar opposite of the first, and according to my colleague, Dr. Richard Lichter, of the Center for Media and Public Affairs, this culture, television culture, is replete with incest, homosexuality, sadism, masochism, with rape, with bestiality, with necrophilia, with onanism, with every form of deviant and perversion and casual premarital sex on a regular basis." He said, look, he named them, there's the rube world and the tube world. And the rube world was the real world. That's how people actually were. And then there's the tube world. That's what television in 1997 was portraying. Daytime soap operas, for example, 94% of sexual encounters were unmarried. 94% unmarried. Before 1969, he said, only 1 in 30 shows portrayed extramarital affair at all. In 1970s, or after, by the end of the 1970s, it was 1 in 8. By the end of the 80s, it was 1 in 6. Extramarital affairs portrayed on television. Does anyone remember what sitcom broke the barrier by suggesting that the couple slept together in the same bed? No. I heard close one over here. You said Mary Tyler Moore was actually one she was on before that. Dick Van Dyke, that's right. Dick Van Dyke was the first one to suggest that they would sleep in the same bed. You go back and watch reruns of I Love Lucy, and there's their twin bed on each side of the room, one for Lucy. You go back to, we were watching Gone with the Wind the other day, and Rhett had his room on this end of the house, and Scarlett had her room on that end of the house. You have the same rooms. You just didn't portray married couples being together during those. And so this idea that an extramarital affair, I mean, that was 1969. Before that, 1 in 30 show might suggest that. Now, before 1970, in that time when it was like 1 in 30 when it would come up, 38% specifically indicated that adultery was wrong. Most of them didn't say one way or the other. Was it good or was it bad? But 38% would suggest that we probably shouldn't be doing that. By 1997, 7% would indicate that adultery was wrong. And it's not just that sex is more prevalent, it is that it was condoned and accepted, normalized, standardized, and it was often advocated and encouraged. I remember not long after I started preaching, I would get these religious journals in different ways, and it wasn't Christianity Today or the Gospel Coalition or something like that. It was something like that. I don't remember the exact one. But there was an article about, it was written by a woman and why she felt like God wanted us to, wanted her to live together with her boyfriend before they got married. Try one another out sexually to see if they could be compatible for the rest of their lives. And if they weren't sexually compatible, then they could break up and go with someone else. And as if this was what God wanted. She was not just advocating. She was saying this makes more sense in the grand. And this is a religious, a popular Christian publication, and that was her stance. And I remember reading that and thinking, wow, it's like you've never heard of the Bible. It's like you've never heard of God or anything like that. But that's the mentality. That's the product of this desensitizing of our this proselytizing of television sexual culture in the modern world at the time. In 1987, I know we're getting way back, a study by Planned Parenthood, who, by the way, they're not friendly to religious ideals or anything like that. They're wondering, why do we have so many young women coming to us that are pregnant and out of wedlock? That's their question. We got to study this. What is it? They concluded that there were some 65,000 sexual references a year on television during afternoon and evening hours. Late afternoon, primetime viewing hours, 65,000 sexual references a year, including innuendo, references to intercourse, portrayals of intercourse, or of sexual deviancy. 1987. That was before Friends and before Seinfeld, before the Pack of Pals shows, which was dominated by that theme for years. 65,000 references. The average American TV viewer saw between 14 and 20,000 instances of sexual material every year, 220 instances daily during primetime hours between unmarried partners, and less than 10% suggested that it was inappropriate for any reason. Some of them thought it was inappropriate. It would be portrayed, this connection between this man and this woman is inappropriate. 10% of the time they didn't even suggest it's inappropriate, but of those 10%, the few times they did say it was inappropriate, it was mostly over things like age gap, race, culture, where they come from, the rich man and the poor girl or something like that. That was the only thing that they were suggesting that was inappropriate about it. And that's the backdrop of television that is on approximately 7 hours a day in the average American home. And you may say, my TV's not on that much. Great, good for you. Here's what gets me, though. That all of those statistics were given by Dr. Murray before a Senate subcommittee in 1997, when there was basically no internet, no social media, and no smart devices. Murray summarized this way. He said, teens have two choices, two cultures out there. The lived life of fidelity, commitment, involvement, the lived life of reproduction that is monogamous and faithful and encouraged through a family and community and investment in the future. And number two, a virtual world, a hypersex world, a digitized world, a shadowy world of figures that are heightened with arousal. Which do you think has won the battle since 1997? Listen, we're trudging upstream here, obviously. That's why we're talking about being set apart. That's the backdrop. Now, what has that created? That's what we're going to get into. But aside from television, we now contend with ubiquitous pornography, idealized and idolized romance novels, salacious advertising, even racy conversations at the table next to you in a Chili's or even maybe at your table. Sexuality has been brought to the forefront in our modern culture. I would say in modern American culture, but as you know, there are some cultures that are ahead of America. Obviously, there's some that are better off than what we are on that. But there are some that are worse than American culture. What does this do? And here's, I think, where we have as Christians come to grips with what is facing us. This creates an unreal expectation in our generation, the generation after us, the generation after them, and the ones to come about sexuality. In appearance, what we see on television are the pretty people. And they're in this idolized, with an O-L, idolized hookup culture, frequency, libido and aggression. There's an unrealistic expectation of a libido and aggression towards sexuality between men and women. What we see on television, those of us who've been around the block a few times, we know is not real. But our problem is that our 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old boys and girls are seeing it portrayed that way, while their prefrontal cortex is not even fully developed until they're like 25 years old. And they're seeing this, and they're thinking, oh, well, this must be the way it is. And if my girl or my boy is not that sexually aggressive, then that's the wrong person for me. If he or she doesn't look like that, if I'm not getting lucky with the frequency that the people on television are, if I'm not getting the conquests, what does that do to my little psyche as it's developing? I was reading a book not long ago, and it was talking about the positive trends in sexuality among teens. Right? Sex among teens is dropping off. We think, oh, that's great, that's wonderful, and it is. Why is it dropping off, though? Is it because they're coming closer and closer to God? No, it's because they're terrified they're not going to measure up to everything that's out there telling them what sexuality is supposed to be. I'm not that good. I'm not that pretty. I don't have that raging hormones and that desire. I don't measure up, and so I'm going to withdraw from it altogether. Or I'm going to deviate from the expectations, and so you have the turn toward homosexuality and transgender and bisexuality and pansexuality and all these other things, because I know I'm not what's portrayed on Friends or whatever show you want to put in there.
There's another factor in there anymore, and that's a public school system.
And how does that factor in, would you say?
They're teaching, LGBTQ plus minus whatever stuff all the time.
Yes, and I understand why, the idea of acceptance and respect and things like that. I understand why they're doing it, but you're right. It is definitely creating a skewed understanding of sexuality. And my problem is that even school is not as influential on a teenager's sexuality and view of sexuality as much as television is. And as much as the telephone is, and the TikToks and the social media. I mean, but you're right. You're absolutely right. Schools are advocating. The schools are kind of caught in a limbo between what should we do, and between for parents, what's our obligation as the state? What do kids actually need to hear? And they're you think as parents we've got tension. The school has tension because they're being drawn in a lot of different ways. And so they're very careful about it usually. Not always, there's obviously some that are out there to break that mold. But even the ones that break the mold are less influential than the stuff our kids are seeing every day, reading every day. I say reading, I have a cousin who prides himself on not reading anything. If he can't get his information from the video clip, he won't know it. But I realize reading is not done as much as it used to be, but that's a real thing. So it's discouraging young people who fear not measuring up to the expectations. And the other thing, and probably the biggest one of all of these, is it corrupts the holy design of sexuality. Because remember, God created sexuality. It's about connection, right? Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh, right? The man and his wife were both naked, and they were not ashamed. There was a natural unashamedness between them, and that the idea of the nakedness was that what came with that nakedness was that relationship. That's they shall become one flesh, right? That's the connection. That's what God created sex to be able to do. That it would bring us together as a husband and wife, and that connection would be an intimacy, a deep sharing with one another. What the modern hookup culture and portrayals in most videos and things like that today is that there is no deep connection. If there's a chemistry, that chemistry, that's the spark. We'll get it going, and we start with the sexual relationship. If it progresses past that, then we start to deeply connect emotionally and intellectually and spiritually, and we'll connect on those things. But the first rattle out of the box by portrayal is the sexuality. We have taken this connection that God so beautifully created for humanity, and it's been rejected, and it's difficult for children, teens, young adults to grasp that whole idea. That's why we see the world today, and I think one of the early statistics we had in another one of the classes for this set apart class was the number of people who identify as Christians who are living with their boyfriend or their girlfriend. They've looked at their situation. They said, there's no reason for me to be renting an apartment and you be renting an apartment. It'd be much better if we were just renting one apartment. And one of the things that brings with it is a sexual relationship between us. And one or both of them identify as Christian. And we're pulling our hair out thinking, how can you identify as a Christian and think that that's acceptable to God? Julie and I have been discussing this for a lot of today. How do you justify that? You can't read much of the Bible and come away with this idea that God wants you to have sex without the relationship. He created sex with the relationship, that connection. Stephen?
I think it comes from, they get all that programming out there, but the church, like you said at the very beginning, Solomon 7 made us uncomfortable.
Yeah.
If they don't hear it in the church what a healthy relationship is, not just seeing couples and all their families that are around here, but if they don't hear it in the Bible classes, if they don't hear it from the pulpits, and our preachers are afraid to teach it, then what a healthy relationship is supposed to be, what sexuality is supposed to be, then they don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, I see someone else raising their hand.
No, I was saying, you said Christians moving in together, how do they justify it? I know a couple individuals in the past were Christians, and they justified as man and woman because they both had their own room. And so they saved money. So they were thinking, it wasn't about the money, it's just we even have our own space. And it's like...
Well, let me ask this question. In that situation, were they sexually active with one another?
When they started, no.
Okay, so here's listen. I don't think that's a wise situation, and I would counsel anyone to go against it. But let's say they were apart sexually and they never came together. That's something different. I mean, the sexuality is not there. The reason why I would counsel against it, though, is because of what actually did happen. Is the wisdom of it. But a lot of them, they don't even think that deeply on it. I think for a lot of them, there's a disconnect between the spirit and the body. My spirit is what's saved. Jesus saved my spirit. My body, it can do whatever it wants. I can do whatever I want with my body. Paul talks about that in Romans. We'll get into that when we'll go to Romans on Sunday nights. But it's not just about the connection. It's about the honor. Listen. Sexuality, viewed from God's perspective, is that it is an honorable thing. It's good for the husband and the wife to come together. Let marriage be held in honor among all. Let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous. Hebrews 13:4. He said that marriage bed, it's undefiled, it's beautiful, it's honorable. And you keep it that way by staying with one another. That faithfulness and that fidelity, that commitment to one another. That marriage becomes this outlet for a sexual burn that is within us, right? 1 Corinthians 7, Paul says, beginning in verse 2, but because of the temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give to his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. This sexuality is something that is God created us with, a draw toward the other person. And Paul says, if you can't contain that, get married. So you will have that outlet, that honorable, I would say holy outlet. Sexuality in the marriage is a holy thing. I don't know. I had 2 boys at home. I don't think I ever made that statement to my sons, that sex was something holy. And I failed them in that way. I don't know about you. I don't know how you talked about your children with it, but it's honorable, and it's holy. But notice what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 6, just before he goes into, chapter 7, he asks this, question, or he's probably asked the question, is it, should a man not be with a woman or a woman with a man? But he's dealing with, in that context of 1 Corinthians 7, the sexual content actually begins back in chapter 6. We're going to go back to chapter 6 and verse 12. He says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach and stomach for the food, and God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you not know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one with her? For as it is written, the two will become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against his own body. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. I think the idea of the separation of the spirit or the soul from the body, my soul, my spirit, I'm going to keep that in control for God, but the body, I'll just let it do whatever I want. It's like if I can keep my soul protected, I don't have to worry about the body. And I think that's how some of these Christians, Christian identifying people, are living with boyfriend and girlfriend without marriage, is because they have dissociated their spirituality from their body and what's going on in their body. But Paul says, look, every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexually immoral person sins against the body. This goes into a discussion we don't have time for tonight, but the theology of the body itself. It's a sin against his own body. You're not your own. You were bought with a price. And it's interesting to me, he's not just saying your soul was bought with a price. In the context, your body was bought with a price. It belongs to God. And so we need to be set apart in our attitudes about sexuality. And what that means, we need to be very careful about what we allow into our homes.
Amen.
Now, listen, there are age-appropriate things. I understand that. I'm not saying, there are things, for example, you can watch a TV show that you may not let your kids watch, right? Because they don't understand the themes and things like that. I understand that. I'm not saying, you can't watch anything that a child can. I'm not condemning you to watch Bluey all the time, okay? You can there's age-appropriate programming, and you might consume something that you wouldn't let your 14 or 15 or 16-year-old consume. And what that is in your house, I'm just telling you, be careful about it. I'm not going to tell you what you can watch and what you can't watch. I'm saying be careful about what you're allowing into the homes. And then I think this one is an important, maybe even more important, is that in your home, for your children or your grandchildren, portray a healthy sexuality of love and joy and commitment, faithfulness, fulfillment, holiness, and godliness. That means don't be afraid appropriately to talk to your children about sexuality, about joys, about fulfillment, expectations. It is true that oftentimes when we are in hushed tones and secretive about things, it piques interest. And if we're not going to answer that interest that we've already piqued because of how we were silenced about it, they'll find other ways to get that information. And there's no shortage of other ways to get that information. So when I do premarital counseling with people, I often talk about when you have kids, flirt with each other in front of your kids.
Amen.
Don't be afraid to kiss your spouse in front of your kids. They need to be able to see what a healthy sexuality looks like, so that that daughter or that son can grow up and look for that. This is what I look for in my future spouse. And I would just refuse to be silent about it, because no one else is being silent about it. Yes.
I